In the last 2 years, it's been very difficult to put myself out there simply because of what the world has been through and what I have witnessed. And state oppression is that winter and violence is that winter. And in this particular case, it could be the tragedy of Kashmiri turning against Kashmiri, which is, the darkest or the lowest point. It's the kind of school that I've been to where I've learned what not to do. There are, of course, journalists. I know friends of mine who were journalists who gave up journalism because of the harassment they faced. What has happened in Kashmir actually is just the political ground has been pulled from underneath the people's feet.
You made Harud, then you made Maagh. It was like 2 seasons of a long unfolding story, but the 3rd season never came.
After 2019, spring is no longer even a pipe dream. It really made me angry because half the world was saying, oh, we did not know. We did not know only means that you looked the other way. Before he could fire the shot to kill him, he saw the person and he was a stark naked man holding a child's photograph. In fact, Arundhati Roy in an interview said, when she's being lauded and applauded, in the back of her mind, she's thinking about that somewhere in some room, somebody is getting beaten up for that. What value does art hold if you reach this point where children are being mass slaughtered, which basically means you're murdering the future, and being labeled terrorists by people who are the original terrorists, people who actually set up a state using terrorism. This whole thing about Kashmiris or Kashmir being brought into the mainstream is the pitch, is the ad. But actually what you see is India is becoming more and more like Kashmir when it comes to just the oppression. Today I saw the face of what we've become, and it was buried in trash. It was after the hospital. My hands still smelled of blood and iodine, as if I had just pulled death out of someone's lungs.
तुमने मुझे पाताल लोक से निकाल लिया. That's what he told me when I finally convinced him to give in to this conversation. But when a storyteller buries himself under the rubble of collapsed stories that we tell ourselves about nations, about art, about justice, stories that we can no longer believe in, it is a sign. Dystopian, almost apocalyptic, signaling a fracture in our times. And from across that fracture, I've somehow managed to retrieve that voice. The last time it spoke truly, it carried the immense weight of an unending winter. And now that it has decided to speak again, I wonder if we will be able to bear the burden of what it has to say. But it was me who insisted on this conversation. सुना है दर्द की गाहक है चश्मे नाज उसकी, so हम भी उसकी गली से गुजर के देखते हैं. Welcome, Aamir, on the soft record.
Thank you for having me. And
so now that I've pulled you out of the depths, are you breathing any better, or does the light still sting?
I don't know. It is difficult for me to. In the last 2 years, it's been very difficult to, put myself out there simply because of what the world has been through and what I have witnessed. And it sits heavy with me. It's kind of, damaged a lot of things within and outside.
We will get into it. But let me ask you that the last time that the world saw you was, I think you were in Rocky or Rani, and then you were in another television series, School of Lies. And I think they both released around the same time, middle of 2023. And somewhere before that, your directorial venture, the second film that you made, Maagh, had also released, and the world was slowly witnessing it. And I have to ask you that, actors live with this kind of doubling. It is a story that they carry inside them and the stories that they enter. But what happens when the gap between them is so wide that it almost might be disorienting, or it's a huge dissonance?
Well, it can be disorienting, but you would have to, if you are the kind of an actor who takes his or her work home, yes, then it can be disorienting. But at the same time, it is also an opportunity. It's always a challenge. And I think most actors would like the gap to be as wide, or, just the varied parts that are offered. You would have to consider yourself as an actor lucky at, in some ways, because that's what we are actually looking for. You're always looking for, I don't want to repeat myself. And that has been my problem, being trying to act in Bombay is, it's very easy, especially in mainstream films, to be typecast. I remember I played a pediatrician in a film called Arman, and for the next several months, doctor is what they wanted me to play. And and most of the time it was like a bit part, but a doctor. And when I played a cop in Wednesday, and that's why that may be one of the reasons why I'm not seen as often, and I'm not as prolific as an actor, because I have always resisted this kind of assault of being to be pigeonholed that easily. So yeah, it was interesting, because I remember not just release. I was shooting for School of Lies in Ooty, and which was this really dark space, and to come from there to a Dharma Productions set was like, it was literally like, yeah, now I can breathe. And so the contrast was there. And
so did one help you survive the other, I suppose?
I guess it does. Yeah, it does. It's it's yin and yang, light and heavy. So yeah, I mean, I saw it initially as a challenge, but I think I enjoyed it quite a bit. But as far as storytelling and directing and filmmaking is concerned, that's a completely different ball game, in my opinion, because nothing else really enters that space when I'm making a film of my own. So that is a complete break, and as far as acting is concerned, I can't even. Most actors, when they make films, they want to make films for themselves, because they believe, their work has not been, or their talents have not been exploited, or, and just to display their wares, they, write a really dialogue-heavy film most of the time. And I was kind of aware of that, and I didn't want. I mean, even in Harud, friends of mine said, "Why don't you play this role? Why don't you?" I said, I cannot contaminate my own, work by being there as an actor. So yeah, these are, I mean, two separate worlds when it comes to.
But I want to speak a little more deeply about Maagh, because of course there is a lot of curiosity, at least on my part, because I haven't been able to watch the film still. Whatever information I've gathered is from what the press has covered and people who've been able to see it. But it is your most recent directorial work, and it has been very underwatched. And you began working on it very early, right? In 2012, 2013. And by the time it released, it was 2022. Why did it take so much time?
Well, that is one of the tragedies of trying to be a regional filmmaker from a region that doesn't produce films. But for me, it's always been, I mean, both my films, very difficult to raise the money, the funding for it, to convince people. It's well nigh impossible in India to, we firstly don't have institutional funding. We mostly dependent on private equity in that sense. And for anybody to put money in a film which is political, it's from Kashmir, it's a no-no. And even going outside of India, it's because that they are not really familiar with the place or the politics or the conflict. It is very hard to convince them. There are so many times that I've applied to some place and they said, but this doesn't tell me what the conflict is about. And I'm like, but I'm making a fiction film. I'm not making a documentary. And with both my films, it was actually, I ended up, spending from my own pocket, and some friends contributed and all. But both the times, the funds abroad were kind of convinced only after they saw some rushes or an edit that we had shot already, with very, very meager resources. So it's more like I got basically finishing funds to finish the film rather than production. So it's a Sisyphean task in that sense. You have to start from scratch and do it the longest, hardest possible way, which is basically just, it's very time consuming. So it took me 10 years to make my second film. And that is one of the big obstacles when people ask me about what's next and all. I'm like, can I really go through this again?
Thought of it is exhausting.
Yeah.
The title itself, Maagh, it places the movie in deep winter. So I want to ask you, what does winter mean to you, especially in the context of this film? Does it serve as a metaphor? Does it serve as a mood? Or is it a historical marker?
It's a bit of everything in that sense. Metaphor, firstly, yes, because autumn, Harud was there, and Harud, the metaphor, I used that as a metaphor, and similarly in this. And it's winter, I guess, is again, like in Harud, there was this Kashmiri phrase, Harduk Zazur, which is autumnal decay, and there's another Kashmiri phrase, urgent tur. Basically, the cold has entered my bones, seeped into my bones. So it was that sort of a thing that I had in mind, of this seeping in or the coming in, rather than winter, like we normally see, it's outside, the weather outside, but it's come into people's lives. So that, using that as a metaphor, and it can be, again, state oppression is that winter, and violence is that winter, and in this particular case, it could be, the tragedy of, a Kashmiri turning against Kashmiri, which is sort of the darkest or the lowest point. So it is that all of these things put together is what I wanted to basically convey.
And what I've gathered is that the film is very sparse, like there's very little dialogue, there have been long silences, meditative frames. So was that Restraint, it was born out of an aesthetic instinct, or was it a political act,
Again, you're not really thinking about compartmentalizing when you're writing something. These are things that you look back, or people point out something like this. But in terms of form, it's more about putting some kind of restraint on us, or the process, to see what emerges out of that. And that restraint or restriction, I was hoping that basically that would bring us closer to the subject matter, because that's what the subject matter is about. It's about lack of freedom, it's about restriction, it's about being sort of under restraint. So in that sense, for example, my first film in Harud, the entire film was shot handheld. And I think there was just one shot maybe, which was like just a vista of the lake, which was on tripods. And here we, because of again the space, the house that we were shooting in, and we could not put a tripod there. So there's just one shot which you probably won't be able to tell that it is handheld. So yeah, I mean, these are also these things. I mean, I don't have a fixed idea in that sense, It's just, it makes things more organic. Like I said, something emerges in it. And also, there are times, when I want to keep that distance. It gives me, the distance between my own characters actually and the eye watching. So these are the things that I'm thinking about generally. There is emotionally charged scenes, and the tendency is to go close. But somewhere at the back of my mind, I want, like, again, because these are my characters, I want to give them the space or dignity. So I'm actually doing something really counterintuitive when it comes to filmmaking, because, an emotional scene, you want the audience to connect, come closer and see what's happening. So those things are generally, nothing really hard and fast, but more or less, also aesthetically, the main thing was because me as an actor, sort of learning on the job has been mainly in commercial, whether it's series or television or film. So not going down that road. I mean, it's a kind of school that I've been to where I've learned what not to do rather than, and trying to make a, stick to a universal sort of language when it comes, which is basically images.
Yeah. So, so much of Kashmir is spoken in the language of headlines, statecraft, and or resistance, for that matter. But Maagh lingers, in the afterlife of violence, in kitchens, in living rooms, and in daily repetitions, So, were you trying to reclaim Kashmir as a lived space rather than a narrative space?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's the narrative is also, I mean, it remains a narrative. I mean, it is after all a film, and it is more or less like a counter narrative to what is the dominant narrative. That was my main motivation generally, because, the silencing of the Kashmiri voice, and in some ways erasure, especially in the last 10 odd years, newspaper archives are being erased. There are so many incidents, huge incidents, that if you go into websites of newspapers that are printed in Kashmir, you will get an error 404 kind of message out of it. So my main motivation was to basically, there's a couple of things, basically to give like a counter narrative, and also to, it's sort of a stand against that erasure. Because that is what is happening, especially The newspapers, and I'm talking about newspapers because that's where your source of information is, that's where you base your stories from, that's where everything. But, last 5 years, newspapers cannot print their front page without getting, a clearance from the governor's office. There are, of course, journalists I know, or friends of mine who were journalists who gave up journalism because of the harassment they faced from the police. And, bizarrely, recently, again, a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, they came up with this term called narrative terrorism, which basically means that you can be a terrorist for telling a story. And that's how, for example, people like Fahad Shah, who used to run a news portal called Kashmir Wala, he spent 2 years in prison. You have Khurram Parvez, globally known human rights activist, a lawyer, somebody who had lost his colleague very early in his work, lost his own leg in a landmine explosion. He's been in prison for 4 years. For what? For collecting the data of all the violence, whether it was committed by militants or any security force, everything across the board. It's like, and what happens is his offices get raided. He's again framed under some terrorism law. All his data is taken away. All his hard drives are taken away. All his work is taken away. And the point is, even though they're saying that he's a terrorist and but they're also admitting that his work is bad for India's image. So when a 2019 UN human rights report came out for the first time criticizing India, Khurram Parvez didn't stand a chance after that. And I think this is the tragedy of our times, is that how easily somebody like Khurram Parvez can be forgotten. It's been 4 years, and within Kashmir, nobody's, like, this new government has come in, nobody's talking about him. If you think of, it's a small place, Kashmir, but he was, I think, a year or so before, in the Time magazine's list of 100 most influential people. So that's silencing at that level, where literally truth is being buried. He was the one who collected all the data about more than 6,000 unmarked graves found in various, basically the hinterland in Kashmir. 6,000. These are numbers that if it happens anywhere else, it would be global, and it became global news. And around the same time, a very prominent journalist was assassinated, just to distract from this UN report coming out, so that this incident becomes the news. So, yeah, like I said, it's not just muzzling, it's complete silencing. What has happened in Kashmir actually is just the political ground has been pulled from underneath the people's feet. It's just they have nothing to stand on anymore.
So when you made Maagh, what did you want the audiences to leave with the way you've chronicled Kashmir? Was it an image, a question, or
Yeah, I think, for me, it's always
or a wound?
questions.
Yeah.
It's always a question. It's always an opening. It's always like I'm giving a portal for anybody who's interested to dig deeper into what has happened there in the last 30, 35 years. So nothing, there's nothing more really. I just want people to take a look, listen or research or find out more. And also in some ways, I believe, cinema is like a time capsule. And somewhere down the line, somebody might want to know what things were like. There is some, even though it's fiction, it's not like an academic work or something, but they can still look back and get something out of it.
You made Harud, then you made Maagh. It was like 2 seasons of a long unfolding story, but the 3rd season never came. You also halted. There was a halt. Why was that? Why isn't the 3rd season coming?
We've already talked about how difficult it is to raise funds for a film like that. Also, again, after 2019, spring is no longer even a pipe dream. It's just, the level of hopelessness that I have noticed and witnessed in Kashmir, where it's people are preferring to be silent rather than say anything. But the question is, how long can you suppress what you're feeling, and what shape will it take eventually? So it's like a pressure cooker situation. I don't know how far down the line something, some eruption will happen. But it's a very unnatural state to be in. So we'll see.
So at this time, this blockage, what does it feel like? Is it a psychological blockage? Is it a structural blockage? Is it a creative?
My personal blockage you talk about? Yeah, it is mainly psychological, but it's it seems, it brings me again to Palestine, what is happening in Palestine. And from a Kashmiri perspective, there was an unspoken link between Kashmir and Palestine. Again, looking at it as a filmmaker, just the imagery of the Palestinian Intifada and the protests that happened in Kashmir very often, sometimes you couldn't probably tell the difference. It's just maybe architecture and obviously the landscape and all, but it's very similar. So it's, and what has happened in Palestine has, it's like so many people around the world, it has kind of upended my view of the world. And, I've ended up questioning myself and the outside world as well. It's just been. It's very difficult to wrap your head around, to make sense of it, of this kind of cognitive dissonance, these levels of hypocrisy, the sheer racism of it all, and when it comes to you grow up, you get this kind of. I went to a Christian missionary school, so you get this Western rationalist kind of education. You're always looking westwards for culture, for music, for art, for institutions, democracy, freedom, human rights. And something like this makes you wonder, what were you thinking? Because this is all a facade. And I believe right now, just nation states, constitutional democracies are actually subverting their own constitutions. Governments are actually actively working against their own people. America has a Leahy law. You can't sell weapons to people who are committing war crimes. Ignore it. UK has similar laws. And in India, we have the prime example of the constitutional link between Kashmir and India being thrown into the dustbin of history. And one of my uncles is a senior journalist who's been a witness, who's almost 90 years old now, been a witness of basically history in Kashmir in the last more than 50 years. I mean, the disillusionment that he has felt, it's almost like, because he was, along with another uncle of mine, they were really close friends. An uncle who was a parliamentarian also in the 70s. They believed in constitutionalism. They believed in dialogue. They believed in engagement. But, at this point, looking back, it was almost like they want their past erased, in the sense that what they believed in was completely false. So it's a rudderless time. It's just, I'm kind of, what does one believe in? I find people who have faith are somehow fortunate, because the prime example of it is, Palestinians. They're all believers in that sense. They never forget to thank God, no matter your child is in a body bag in pieces, and they're thanking God. Unfortunately, I've, never had that kind of faith. And like I said, maybe this Western education and everything has something to do with it, but it's just...
So, this wound of Palestine, how long has it been festering inside you? Was it even before October 7th?
Oh, yes. Of course. No, I remember I was...
When this paralysis...
I was a young boy when I heard about Sabra and Shatila, for example. I wasn't born when the 67 war happened or any of that. But I remember Ariel Sharon. I remember, the massacre that took place, even though I think I was 12 or 13 years old. So Palestine, I don't know, maybe it's to do with, I guess I've never really thought about it, but there is some sort of an obsession with justice or the injustice of it. Wherever there is injustice, it kind of pulls me. So, no, I mean, Edward Said, and, so that's another thing, so much literature, so much has been written about Palestine, and it really made me angry because half the world was saying, oh, we did not know. We did not know only means that you look the other way. It's because the facts are there, the truth is there, the information is there. You did not know because you chose not to look. This brings me to Isabella Hamad's Edward Said Memorial Lecture, which she gave, I think, in late September of 2023, called Recognizing the Stranger. And this is what she talks about, the deniability. It's basically you're living in denial by saying, we did not know. And there is this amazing image that she wrote about in that piece, or spoke about this Israeli soldier on the perimeter of Gaza who's like a sniper. And they're given instructions that if you see anybody approaching, you have to fire like a warning shot, then a second warning shot, and a third one. If he keeps approaching further, he or she or whatever, even if it's anything that moves, then you shoot to kill. And this soldier, she had met in northern Israel somewhere, and she realized that he was actually, he had run away from the army and he was in hiding. And so he told her about a person approaching nearly a kilometer away first. And through his viewfinder, he saw a blurred figure. He fired a shot, came close. That person kept moving. He fired another warning shot, and before he could fire the shot to kill him, he saw the person, and he was a stark naked man holding a child's photograph. And that's how he recognized the stranger. He left. He abandoned his post and ran.
So were you following these stories so closely since when?
I followed every time. For example, Operation Cast Lead, 2014, they bombed Gaza during COVID. They used to bomb Gaza at a time when the school shift was changing. 11:30, the morning shift is, the children are leaving, and the afternoon shift, children are coming in. That's when they used to bomb Gaza. So it's these are levels of brutality and evil that you really, it's quite unique. It's unique. And what is also unique is how it's being celebrated in some quarters, especially in the West. I still remember Madeleine Albright. She was Secretary of State. She was asked about the sanctions in Iraq. leading to nearly 500,000 children dying in Iraq because of all the sanctions and medicines and all of that. Again, baby formula and things like that. And she was asked, "Do you think this was a price worth paying?" And she said, yes. So the West's tendency for this kind of, genocidal tendency, annihilatory tendency, is something that is there. But we choose to look away because the West is affluent. There is, their music is globally available. Their movies are globally available. And, this is our world.
When something as total and inhuman as the genocide is happening around you, as a filmmaker, do you think, is there any form that can actually contain this without reducing it?
That's again something that I'm struggling with. It's at some level, I feel like this is a failure. It's a civilizational failure. It's a failure of art at some level. Because, art has everything to do with truth.
Yeah.
And here, for the last 2 years, we are seeing the truth with our own eyes.
Yeah.
And at the same time, are being told that this is not true. Now, when it comes to, again, storytelling, in my eyes, this is the most important story that can be told right now. And it is being told. And it is being told by the Palestinians themselves. It is being packaged by the Palestinians for the world. The way they consume, the way they're consuming their news, the way they're consuming their content in that format. They don't have, obviously, the luxury of creating art in that moment. But you tell me which Guernica is going to be more powerful in front of what we are seeing in these TikTok reels and Instagram videos. Because for me, Guernica is about Picasso. It's about the artist.
It's not about the world.
At the end of the day, it is whatever, an artist's interpretation. So tomorrow somebody will do an exhibition of artist's interpretation of what happened in Gaza, and people will go, wow, wow, wow. I think I just heard, in fact, Arundhati Roy in an interview said, when she's being lauded and applauded, in the back of her mind, she's thinking about that somewhere in some room, somebody is getting beaten up for that at the same time. And that injustice is actually more important, more relevant than this applause.
So do you think, will it be true to say that as a storyteller at this moment, you feel that the only story that should be told is Palestine, and that you're not in a place to tell that story, and therefore this stasis, therefore this halt?
No, I mean, I'm saying the story is being told. The story is being told by Palestinians. And even before this, like I said, all the writing and all the art and all the films and all the literature and the poetry is already there. And they have been talking about being under occupation. since they've been under occupation.
Mm.
And they produced art and, but what did it lead to?
Mm.
I mean, if all the art in the world cannot do anything about racism, what value does art hold at the end of the day? What value does art hold if you reach this point where children are being mass slaughtered, which basically means you're murdering the future, along with you murdering the truth? Because the truth remains that these are people who came from Europe. They used force. They stole land. They drove people out.
Mm.
That's how this place was created, called Israel. It is stolen land. It is not the first time the land has been stolen, but it is the first time since all these global institutions were put up to prevent something like this happening again, a so-called post-colonial world.
Mm.
Again, this post-colonial world is a facade.
Yeah.
As we know now, not just in Palestine, but other parts of the world, because especially in Africa.
Do you think we would have enabled this to occur in a world where there was a counter force, and no matter how flawed it was, but there was a Soviet Union, there was non-aligned movement, there was this entire counter narrative, and there were at least optics to be protected. At this point, it feels like, Gaza is the fire and capital is the oxygen, and there is no water left in the world.
I mean, specific. In the case of Palestine, they were still occupied. Soviet Union was there. Like I said, Sabra Shatila, for example, happened in 82. So yeah, it's a tragedy, because at the end of the day, it seems like it's a conflict, not a conflict, but it's the wealthy are actually going against disenfranchised poor people.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that, I think Palestinians have shown that they are super rich when it comes to qualities like humanity and dignity. But the fact that they are an occupied people for nearly now more than 75 years. Yeah. And being labeled terrorists by people who are the original terrorists. People who actually set up a state using terrorism. Irgun, Haganah, Lehi gangs. These are the people who formed the Israeli army eventually. These are the people who became prime ministers and presidents. So they've been using these tactics since the inception of the state. Just yesterday, they killed the prime minister of Yemen.
Yeah.
We have reached a stage where heads of states are being assassinated by airstrikes by a foreign power. what is left of the world? I mean, I don't understand how are we going to proceed when no law, nothing matters?
So, what do you think of the people who are mobilizing everywhere, who are coming together and protesting on the streets? What should they hold on to?
See, that that is the only way, actually. And that is why you see protest being criminalized everywhere. We have an example within India in the last 10 years. The farmers' protest is the only success story in that sense.
Yeah.
You see, in this, ever since we've got smartphones, we're all prisoners to it. Because we are actually sitting at home dealing with, everything in the cloud. This feet on the ground is the only way one can bring about any change. But right now you can see again the disconnect between states, between governments, especially, I've criticized the West a lot, but it's happening in the West more than anywhere else. It's not happening that often in the globals, what they call the global South.
Yeah.
Or former colonies, basically. And India is a prime example of that. And speaking of connections, 1930s, there was an Arab revolt against the British. 1930s, there was a Kashmiri revolt against the Maharaja. So that kind of decolonizing efforts were happening then. But at that time, the British, because their armies were kind of short of manpower, thought about bringing in their soldiers from India. But they went against it because they thought Indian soldiers would be sympathetic towards the Arabs. And they will not be very effective in putting down the revolt. From there to Gandhi's views on Palestine. From there to Indira Gandhi and Yasser Arafat during the non-aligned movement, meeting in Delhi and hugging, and to now actually contributing by not just sending drones, manufacturing drones and sending them to Israel. India is the number one buyer of Israeli weapons. Weapons that are tested and advertised as tested on civilians. You tell me where is India going to use these weapons? Does India have a colony? No? Well, the thing with oppression is, we've, as Kashmiris, I remember when I came to college in 1990, which is again around the same time that, the trouble started in Kashmir. Two incidents I remember clearly. There's one person who asked me, so what's happening in Kashmir? And I was trying to tell him, I've just come out of like months of curfew and it's like serious oppression. He said, India needs a dictator. We need military rule. That's the only way we can fix it. This is in 1990 in St. Stephen's College. The second incident I remember was, I think, in 92 or something. We used to have, I think it was for something called informal discussion group or something. And they used to get some prominent person to college. And Harshad Mehta was invited. And he got a hero's welcome in St. Stephen's College. I mean, I did not know anything about the stock market or economics, but even at that time, it made me uncomfortable. Just the fact that somebody has become rich quickly and, is being hero worshipped by these young people, I found it very odd. And both these incidents, the first one I remember, I think the person who said we need military rule, in fact, ended up in FTI. And
who was that?
No, I'm not going to name names, but I think thankfully he never made any films. So, yeah. So these two were like in some ways defining moments. It was like what was to come later on. So, sorry, what was the question again?
No. Do you think Kashmir in a way has been like a laboratory for the rest of India?
Of course. Of course. Like I said, again, when 370 was revoked, again celebrated across the board, across the political spectrum. There was no opposition to it. Then it was backed. Then the Supreme Court sat on it for 4 years, 5 years. And then it was just the manner of it. The manner of the revocation was if you're not, the whole Kashmir conflict or dispute or problem was Kashmiris feeling that their political rights are not guaranteed. That it will always be decided in Delhi who's going to do what in Kashmir and who's going to be on the chair and who's going to rule. And that was the fundamental problem. And that they felt that it will never be guaranteed. And you go and do something like this is basically justifying the Kashmiri demand more than anything else.
Have you been back to Kashmir after 2019?
I was there when it happened.
What was it like?
I flew down immediately because phone lines, there was no communication, so I didn't have an option, but I was there. It was like there was curfew and there were just soldiers everywhere. And a relative passed away, so we had to go for the funeral. But it was like driving through a ghost town with just checkposts and, barriers and soldiers everywhere.
You also you used a phrase, you said India is now experiencing its own Kashmirization. What do you mean by that? Could you elaborate?
You see, this whole thing about Kashmiris or Kashmir being brought into the mainstream is the pitch, is the ad. But actually, what you see is Kashmir. India is becoming more and more like Kashmir when it comes to just the oppression. you know, things we experienced in those years. Again, the kind of oppression, the clampdown. Now you're seeing signs of it everywhere. You look at Bhima Koregaon.
Yeah.
You look at Khalid, Umar Khalid. Again, like, I mean, I can't think of a young man somebody, I mean, he's obviously younger than me, but a young man to be so Gandhian in today's world than Umar Khalid. And who doesn't have a single violent bone in him. None of his words, none of his speeches say anything about any violence. He's not even in Delhi, but he is accused of instigating the riots. This is a kind of thing that you could pull off in Kashmir just like that. But it is happening outside of Kashmir. It happened with the Bhima Koregaon. I mean, what? The use of Pegasus, that whole letter, the language used in that letter, that's what I'm saying. The truth being murdered on a daily basis and governments acting against their own people.
So do you think it is some sort of a unveiling of a more central logic of the post-colonial Indian state?
That's a very academic question that I don't know if I'm equipped to answer that. But no. I mean, it's like saying what Israel is doing right now in Gaza is because of what they went through, during the Holocaust, and therefore this is kind of a logical end to it because they suffered the trauma. So because I mean, in Israel's case, the trauma is also 1930s again. There is something called the Havara Agreement between the Nazis and the Zionists, which is basically the plan to move the Jewish population into Palestine. It's happening in the 1930s. But again, the story or the history that people are told is the Holocaust, and I'm not denying it. I'm saying, but that is the reason given. What is this agreement doing well before Auschwitz is established? Education, history, everything. Like I said, I'm questioning everything. I mean, I'm aware in the 60s when student protests were happening in the West, for example, and the reaction to that it shouldn't happen again. Education policies were changed around the world. What you're seeing now, all these tech bros and everybody wanting a degree and becoming, a cog in the wheel of this capitalist machine. I think this is post, that 60s and student protests. And what happened recently in the US, the militarization of police forces. I'm jumping from things to things, but they actually gave This is what I'm saying, when India is buying all these weapons from Israel, who are they going to use it on? They can't have a war with the neighbors every now and then. Who are they going to use it on? The kind of armored vehicles that the American police and the automatic weapons and the armor that they wear themselves, where is all that being used? Where is it coming from? Why do you need it against demonstrators and protesters? Why do you need it?
It's the weapons industry that needs to sell those weapons.
Of course they do, but I'm saying people, it's like technology, you're just adopting everything and anything, and this is also accepted and this is also accepted. Before you know it, none of us are free.
Yes, true. And you've also been sitting with so many personal stories of Palestinians.
This was inevitable, it's just I just couldn't since I couldn't look away, I was just I have spent many a sleepless night. And you start, it's just me trying and failing to feel, to understand what a Palestinian must be going through. I have tried, but it's so difficult that, it's almost like I don't want to see it through myself. Even when I'm so far away, I feel like I will not survive if I see it through. Just the fact that you are actually, for the last 2 years, waiting to die. That you can, anytime it could be you, anytime it could be you. While you're watching others around you being decimated. And then you have the mundane day-to-day things, just searching for food, sanitary conditions, losing your home, living in a tent, cramped in such a small space, water, people with preconditions, diseases who have no more access because there are so many injured and dead that the hospitals have to treat, kidney diseases, heart patients, cancer, for 2 years and no end in sight. I remember what they did with the journalists, these young men, Anas Jamal, Anas Sharif, Hossam Shabat, what they did with the doctors, Dr. Al-Bursh. They were asked to evacuate a hospital, go south. He decides to go further north, goes into another hospital, gets kicked out from there, goes to another hospital, is finally arrested, tortured, sodomized, killed. And then the doctor who buried his own son in the hospital compound, he's arrested. The director of Kamal Radwan Hospital. And there's no trace of him. Last he had broken ribs, he had been tortured, he had lost 1/3 of his weight. Nothing. I remember, these young men, Hind Khodouri, there is an Al Jazeera reporter, she had the option to leave Gaza. She decides not to, just to tell this story, knowing that she could be next. I remember a journalist who left Gaza, but before she left, Yumna Al-Said, she's been speaking around the world about this particular one incident of this boy called Ahmed, 11, 12 years old, while she was reporting after a bombing, and he came up to her and tugged her shirt and showed her his backpack, and he said, "You know who's in this? It's my younger brother." And there was blood dripping from the backpack. And he has, again, this is just the kind of grace and dignity and the upbringing of that child who goes on to say that I thank the uncles who brought me my brother.
Yeah, Susan Sontag had said that when you witness something so inhuman, it can do two things to you. Either it numbs you or it awakens you. I wonder what it has done to you. It definitely has not numbed you, but this is a strange porosity.
I don't know what it is doing to me. I mean, it's keeping me awake at night. It's eating me from inside. But I don't want to make it about me. It's just, but I've just found it very difficult to look away from it. And I know people who were kind of invested in this at the beginning and are like just fatigued and just moving on. And, I'm not judging them for it because this seems like a completely hopeless situation. But, I mean, I'll read something that sort of conveys what I'm feeling about this idea of moving on. This is a doctor in Gaza, a very young doctor. His name is Izzuddin Shahab. And he is an amazing writer because the kind of imagery that he evokes his writing is so powerful. So this is Dr. Izzuddin. Today I saw the face of what we've become, and it was buried in trash. It was after the hospital. My hands still smelled of blood and iodine, as if I had just pulled death out of someone's lungs. I stepped into the street not as a man walks, but as a shadow stumbles, worn, faceless, erased. And then I saw them, in the middle of the road, 6 souls, a family, huddled together not at the edge where the damned usually die, but in the heart of the road, as if they had taken position at the altar of some invisible God who no longer answers. I should have turned away. But curiosity is a wicked thing. It's not wonder. It's hunger. And sometimes it eats you alive. I walked toward them. They were quiet. Too quiet. A circle of bones and breath. And there it was. A meal. Or what I thought was a meal. A miracle maybe for a second. But no. It wasn't food. It was garbage. A pile of trash, stinking, festering, a graveyard of wrappers and waste. And from that grave they had scraped a few strands of spaghetti, cold, sticky, clinging to dirt as if ashamed to be eaten. And then I saw him, the father, with hands no longer hands but trembling instruments of despair. He reached into the trash and lifted the food, not to eat, no, but to feed. He fed it to his daughter, a little girl. Her eyes were too large for her face, her lips cracked, her dress torn like she had fallen through history itself. And he fed her garbage with love, with tenderness, as if it were soup, as if it were gold. He held it delicately, lifted it to her lips with a holy offering. And she took it. She chewed it slowly. She smiled. And I shattered. Because in that moment, the universe reversed. The sacred became foul, the foul became sacred, and I was no longer a witness. I was a criminal. How dare I exist? How dare I walk upright while that child eats from the mouth of death? I did nothing. I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of my own uselessness. I, who have words, hands, and breath, did nothing. And worse, I walked away. But no, that's a lie. I never left. I'm still there.
As I said in the beginning, it would be difficult for us to bear the burden of what you have to say. Let me just bring it to the last act and the last segment. And we call it From the Subconscious Archive. This is for trace work. It's for the half-stepped, the side-stepped, and something that is seen from the corner of the eye. These are one-word answers, choices. So, what have you stopped trying to forget?
Stopped trying to forget. No, I mean, there is so much that, if I had forgotten, I would have been in a better place, but I have stopped, yeah. No, I've owned all the suffering that I've been through. So, yeah.
What image from Palestine do you fear will calcify inside you?
I've seen so many dead children, really, that so many dead children.
When did you last feel joy without guilt?
I have seriously no recollection of any such incident. No, it's something that I've spoken to my therapist about as well. I just don't, because I think pretty early in my life, I figured that joy in itself is pretty fleeting. So whenever there was this kind of a trigger or a spark of joy, something, this is not going to last, so don't get carried away.
What did you once love that you now find unbearable?
So many things to do again with the West. I was a bit of a football fanatic. And I was a huge Liverpool fan. And what my connection to Liverpool also had something to do with injustice, which was the Hillsborough disaster and how the Tory government, Margaret Thatcher's Tory government, actually went after the people of Liverpool, and they actually blamed the people who died. They said the Liverpool fans were drunk and they were stealing from the dead and they were pissing on the dead. And the Sun's, Rupert Murdoch's newspaper, was part of this whole campaign. And this was a bigger campaign that the Tories had against, because Liverpool was this port city, dock workers, unions to break them. And Liverpool since has been sort of anti-national, if you were to, they don't stand for the anthem, and the Scousers are seen as. So because of that, I remember listening to Hillsborough when it was happening on BBC World Service while it was happening, and I remember crying in my room because of what was happening. But when again Gaza happened, and I don't know why, maybe I was naive that I was expecting some kind of somebody with a Palestinian flag or a banner or something, which happened in other parts. It happened in Scotland with Celtic. It happened in Spain quite a bit. It happened in South America. So yeah, football is something I had a very serious relationship with, but I stopped watching last year. And the irony is Liverpool won the league last year.
A smell you'd bottle if you could.
Coffee and cigarettes.
A rumor you'd like to start about yourself.
You brought me out of Patal Lok to start rumors. About myself?
Yeah. There are many floating around. A small, ordinary thing that lately feels political to you.
Everything. I find everything is political. Everything is political. I especially now, sipping water for me is political. Okay. Because it is being denied.
Yeah. Okay, now some this or that. A train window or a cinema screen?
Train windows will survive, cinema screens will go extinct. So I will stick with cinema screen.
Okay. Silence in the mountains or noise in a city cafe? Obviously. Silence in the mountains. Okay. Kahwa or cutting chai?
Kahwa.
Writing in margins or underlining in ink?
I never take notes. I never underline. I never highlight. No, I would never desecrate.
Okay, does it seem like desecration to you? Okay. Long walk with no destination or long conversation with no conclusion?
So repeat that again.
Long walk with no destination or a long conversation with no conclusion?
A long walk.
A half-lit room or a sun-drenched balcony?
That's a strange one. Half-lit room or a sun-drenched balcony? And again, depends on the temperature and where the sun is. If it's in Calcutta, or Bombay in October, then definitely not the balcony. Okay. Maybe toast.
A cell with dignity or a stage without truth?
Cell with dignity.
Boycott or infiltration?
Boycott.
Justice or peace?
No justice, no peace.
And the final is when everything else is stripped away, what remains? A story, a scar, a name that you still whisper, or just silence?
Yeah, the final is silence only. All this struggle for story, blah, blah, blue is, in the end, it's all silence. Nothing remains. Nothingness.
Well, we end here, and not everything has to return as hope. Sometimes it just returns as proof that we are paying attention. Thank you, Aamir, for the conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.